Welcome, everybody. We have a special almost Christmas show. So we have three founders and a VC on here, and wanted to bring Alex on. I've personally known Alex for, it's got to be like, what, 11, 12 years. And I know that Ahmad
Very long time.
yeah. Also, Julian, myself, and Alex all have the Canadian connection, so we're all from Canada, and wanted to just kind of bring them on and kind of shoot the shit and see what's going on in the latest in VC world and what you've learned as a VC and all that kind of great stuff. So I don't know if you want to give just a quick kind of intro on yourself, Alex. Obviously, we have Ahmad here, the founder and CEO of Mercury, best banks for startups, and then Julian, who's a longtime host of the show as well. But Alex, I don't know when you're going to kick it off here.
And then Julian as well. I like that.
People know
Needs no
Julian needs no introduction.
Writer of many books. I know that. I've read your books before.
Wow. Enough about me, Alex. What about you?
Well, thanks for the intro, Kevin. I'm Alex. One of the founding partners of a fund called 8VC. Canadian originally. I now have my U.S. citizenship, so now I'm a dual citizen, if that's okay. But very brief background. I started my career as an engineer operating. So went to University of Waterloo, did engineering, worked at Google, worked at Palantir, worked with Peter Thiel at his hedge fund, Clarium Capital, got pulled to his growth fund, Mithril Capital, and then, left and we started 8VC. Me, Joe Lonsdale, and my partner, Drew Oeding. So I've been doing this job for 10 years, never thought I'd be doing the job. So I think that's common trend. A lot of the best investors probably never thought they would be investors. Not all, but a lot.
Yeah.
And so happy to chat and be here.
Now looking 10 years from when you made that decision, you have a technical background. Was it the right one?
You know what's funny? I was talking about this with somebody earlier. I got accepted twice to do a PhD at the Hinton Lab at U of T in 2008, I think it was, and 2012. And I joke, like, I wonder if I would have made more money with like a PhD in, LLMs, maybe. But I'd say it's worked out well. Peter just did a podcast, said you can't say that you're lucky because you're either like too modest or you're bragging. So I'd say I've been fortunate. It's been good.
That's great. I'm curious, like I look at you in your career and you've now, I don't know if you want to kind of name some of the companies you've been involved in early, but you've had some, relatively to how long you've been in VC, you've had some pretty big hits already, which I don't know if is the traditional path for VC. I would say not. But how has that been in like riding these companies from like inception? Because I know that you go early stage.
Yeah, for sure. I've been invested in companies like Asana and Dural. Your company you and I have debated a little over the years, Deliver, which sold to Shopify for $2 billion. I've also been invested in a bunch of biotech companies. Dren Bio, Orca Bio in particular, doing quite well right now. And so probably unique in that I've really tried to be a generalist. I tend to think if you study anything for 6 months, you can become fairly proficient at it and be able to invest in it. I don't have to be an expert in everything. I have to recognize people who are experts. I think that's a lot of the sort of benefit of early stage investing is if I can recognize someone is excellent and recognize that at a high level there's an opportunity somewhere, I don't have to do the execution. I don't need to know the last 10% of the details. The founder does that, obviously. The founder does almost all the work. I just pick. And it's worked out very well. I also think the more generalist you are, the more diversified you are to sort of innovation curves where, if you were a consumer investor in the consumer internet, the last 10 years, you didn't do that well. Maybe there was one or two winners, you invested in Discord. But if you were so focused on that, you couldn't generate returns every year versus I'll do defense, I'll do healthcare, I'll do biotech, I'll do software AI. You can a little more readily generate returns every year because there's always opportunity somewhere.
Alex, how do you...
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was going to ask you a question. Come on. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, really? Well, let me ask Alex a question. You can ask a question. How do you go from like, I guess both I'm interested in, like, how do you come up with the next thing to investigate? Because, you did defense before anyone else was even thinking about it. So what's your thesis kind of creation mechanism? And then how do you go from like knowing nothing about a space to feeling like confident enough to big investments?
It depends how deep you are in the space, or sorry, how challenging the space is, rather. So biotech is very challenging. I've been studying biotech actually since 2016, and reading papers. One of the benefits of the job is I get to talk to really educated people in domains that I shouldn't actually be able to talk to, and I can ask them stupid questions. And so you shortcut a lot of the learning you would do if you didn't have access to those people. But that took a long time. Defense, we had a little more background from Palantir, so that's actually probably a little more in my domain.
Right.
But the way we sort of identify the next thing is sometimes it's top down, but a lot of the times it's bottom up. We try and invest really early stage. We have a carve out of our fund that's $50 million that we do seed, early stage, pre-seed, seed investing. And you'll talk to really smart people. I mean, probably one of my points of alpha, I'd say, is I could just recognize smart people, like people much smarter than me, and convince them enough to work with me. Like, I'm smart enough that I don't annoy them. They're still smarter than me, but we're close. And you'll find, in sitting in this seat, that sometimes trends will group. You'll talk to, maybe it's 100, 200 people a year, and a lot of people will start talking about the same trends very early. And if you're really good at pattern recognition, you'll say, okay, a lot of people are talking to me about LLMs as an example. Like, we heard about this well before the ChatGPT moment. And then you could start digging and say, okay, look, there is something changing here. And then that eventually internally will become a thesis area, and then we'll get smart on it. But most of the time, it's not us like thinking something up. It's the smartest people we know sort of pulling us into an area and then us paying attention to it.
Ahmad, I'm really curious because you have a really interesting background. Obviously, you founded a couple companies, but also at Mercury, I know that you obviously see, and you were also a YC partner and everything like that. So you see things even earlier, potentially, maybe even earlier at Mercury. And you see when people raise money and all that stuff. Like, what do I saw you had a LinkedIn post around like the things that are getting funded right now, and our audience is mostly like first-time founders, so they're probably looking like, is right now the best time to start a software AI company, or should you be actually starting the next thing? I know obviously Alex is looking for those software AI companies right now, but like, what are your guys' thoughts? And also Julian, as a founder as well, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
So I'm actually an active investor as well. So
that's
I've
right.
invested in 350 companies. So I think AI is actually like pretty hard right now. Like anything that's got like, there's a very large set of things that are obvious, right? Like CS agents, SDR, legal tech, and they're like being swarmed by both VCs and entrepreneurs. And it's just like hearing one of these like 15th pitching the same thing just like doesn't get you excited unless the founder is like really impressive. So I think really you're gonna have to understand something really deeply. I think the most interesting things are either people that understand the tech very deeply. I mean, they've got a PhD in something, they're like super deep in it, and they have like a concept there, or they understand some space really deeply. Like they're like very deep in construction and they've done it for 10 years, or logistics or whatever. And and then, if you understand the space very deeply, like a lot of the recent pitches I've seen, AI is not the pitch. AI is just like, yes, it's like maybe the enabling technology, but it's just like part of the thing. Like they're excited about building something in construction or logistics or whatever. And yes, AI just makes their whole product like a little better, and maybe like makes it 10x better. But it's not the reason that this thing has to exist. Like it's an enabling tool. So I think it's gone from like AI for the sake of AI to AI is just like one of the things you use to like build a great product.
It's just like a platform that you could.
Yeah. And I much prefer if I listen to a pitch and I'm like, oh, this is really compelling. And like, it's not like AI for this. It's just like AI is just how we are enabling X or Y, but we're also doing all of these other things. And that's much more compelling.
I want to sort of, Alex, you introduced me to Joe Lonsdale many years ago. And just, you keep a set of people, and I was close at the time to the Valar guys as well, and another one of Peter's sons. And so you have a set of, I don't want to say contrarian is a very generic thing to say these days, but what I mean is that people that are at different parts of the curve than Twitter is. And so you will hear about things that are more radical more often. And also we're at a point in time where those things are now generalized. In 2016, Peter was going after Trump, and he was the only person to do so. And now there has been this really meaningful shift culturally, maybe, or whatever. And now there's like a much more consensus view in this direction. So, like, I almost feel like the question is like, who do you know that we should know more of, or our audience should know more of, or what is it that you're paying attention to that we're not paying attention to, or that our audience is not paying attention to? Like, what there's something you're seeing, or there's a set of people that you know about that we don't, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it is funny. There was this funny tweet I read online that said, Peter is no longer able to be contrarian, because now every time he says something, millions of tech bros sort of like take that as gospel and it becomes consensus. Mm-hmm. I do think, we have the world, or the Overton window, or whatever you want to call it, has moved in our direction of when we invested in Anduril in 2018, I think it was not popular. Google had just stopped working with, I think it was the DoD, SOCOM, I forget what it was, but they pulled out of one of their contracts because there was an employee revolt. The partner meeting for that investment was, we were discussing it and asking, okay, like, we might get protested and there's like a 10% chance our brand just gets destroyed and we can't do venture anymore, and that's okay. And so it was not popular, and really things have just moved in our direction. I'd say it's an interesting time because AI right now is incredibly consensus, but it, in our opinion, is also real. And it's kind of an interesting trend because everybody just believes it now, like that AI is going to be important. Every corporate buyer is looking for their AI strategy. Everybody thinks this is going to be real. And the whole point of contrarianism is you want to be different and correct, right? You don't want to be different and wrong. So I'd say in the past, we were very good at being different and correct. And that's why the world has moved in our direction. Like, we saw early on, okay, China is a threat. There are geopolitical threats in the world, so we have to invest in defense technology. If the best and brightest in Russia and China are investing in defense and our best technologists won't, that's a problem long-term for America. So we're going to buck that trend. I think slowly everybody's realized that. With AI, I don't think we have much alpha. It's like this weird trend where it was kind of never contrarian. Maybe you could say in 2018 it was contrarian, kind of. Vinod Khosla invested in OpenAI. That was a pretty impressive investment. But man, like the ChatGPT moment, everybody's on board. So I don't think there's like any crazy, unique view we have, other than I think it's going to work. I think it's going to take a lot longer than people think. I do think we're like close to the peak of the hype cycle right now. I do think there'll be a bit of a trough, but I would echo what Ahmad said. Actually, we tend to think a lot of the opportunity now is in verticals, like go and take these new capabilities and get them in front of the way people work. I've been particularly inspired by the company Devon's, one of our investments, started by Cognition, the AI software engineer. I think their UI is just exceptional. I think this co-pilot, supervisor, worker paradigm is what software will look like in the future. And I think it's kind of a race now to start deploying that in verticals. And there's a lot of work out there that's just, if you look at vertical software and vertical workflows, it's like document processing, it's inputting data, it's like some data transformation, it's things that LLMs can do really well. And so I think there's just a ton of opportunity for people who want to go deep in that vertical to apply AI and capture a lot of the value.
Here's a question.
One thing that I think that's kind of cool that I don't think people broadly realize yet is Claude released this thing where it can Claude can kind of take over your desktop and use different applications and like actually really understand and like click on things. I think people have maybe seen it once on X or whatever, but I don't think people have like fully internalized how powerful that will be, especially as it develops. Like you can basically run someone's computer with AI. I mean, that's a ton of applications I think could be opened up with that.
I got a question for everybody here. Everybody here has a really strong network, obviously. And for first question, how do you kind of like, especially early on in your career, how do you kind of identify those people, and then how do you kind of stay close with them over a period of time? And
Will
because I know it's
say that's
really hard to do.
you had that in common. I have that in common. Alex has that in common. He came from Waterloo. It's like a real university, unlike us. Imad, I think you're also an outsider, right? Like we all had to kind of make our way in.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point.
Yeah, not
You know-
everybody could get into Waterloo, so it's a very hard place.
You know what I did at the
Making it about
know-
yourself.
You know what I did at the start when I first moved to San Francisco is I just went to every freaking event. Like most of them were completely
same thing.
useless, but
Yeah.
I was just like, all I did was startups. I was like, wake up at 9, work on my startup, like, go to anything I could possibly get invited to at
Yeah.
like 8 p.m. And then eventually you're like, okay, actually 99% of that is a waste of time, but you meet a few cool people. And like, I have like friendships now that I just literally met at like TechCrunch Disrupt in 2008
Same.
I think you just got to do that hustle at the start. Like it was, most of the time I'm an extrovert, but like I don't like meeting new people that much. But so it was like most of the time, waste of time, like
do you think that
energy
goes-
sucking. But I was just like, this is your job. Like like doing the hard work is part of like
Do you think that goes down over time? Like myself, I try to branch out and meet new people a lot, but like, do you think just as you age, you naturally just stop like expanding your circle? And can that be like
It's tough.
not a great thing?
Yeah.
Or do you see the
Alternative
opposite
dinners.
in people
That's
that
the way
are
to go.
phenomenal?
I think it bifurcates. Like I really like meeting new people and having like these kind of startup conversations or intellectual conversations. Like that's just really fun for me.
Yeah.
I do it more now because I like it rather than like as
Right.
a job, if you know what I mean. Like I don't need to necessarily like meet every VC at like a random event or something.
Right.
But I do like meeting interesting people and like branching out. I guess like Alex probably has to do it a little bit more because it is more of his job.
I think you have to push yourself to do it. I'm actually more of an introvert, so I kind of have rules. If I go to an event, I have to meet at least one new person and get their contact information. Because I get there and I'm just like, okay, I want to leave. Like, no, okay, you have to push yourself a little bit.
Do you have any other rules?
That's number one. I try and be pretty not protective of my time, actually, which is maybe the opposite of what most VCs end up doing. I tend to find people will surprise you if somebody is like smart and capable in their domain. Taking a pitch, going to meet them for coffee, even if they're young and right out of school, you do learn things, and people will surprise you. And so I think having that heuristic helps as well. I mean, it's not as good as when you're a founder because you need to focus and execute. But as a VC, like your job in some sense is networking, and so just take that N+1 meeting. I think it actually just helps you long term and treat people well. That's the other one. Reputation
Right.
actually doesn't catch up to you publicly, but the more you meet people and treat them well, the more your at least private network increases and you see more stuff.
What do you guys think? So I don't do any investing, but for everybody else that does angel investing, and obviously Alex, you do this professionally. What do you kind of look as far as like pattern matching? And the one I'm really interested in, which I think I've kind of changed, but maybe that's just because I've gotten more experience, was like the brand new like 20-year-old person that knows nothing, has no idea about an industry, that's just going to completely look at it differently and has no like the risks they could take are just monumental. They don't have a family, they don't have anything, versus like I see a lot of companies getting funded that are out of name your public company, and they came out of Robinhood or whatever. There's a group of people and they now have productized this thing, and they're now in their like maybe like late 30s or early 40s or something like that. They know a lot about the space. What do you guys think, like as you've invested, like are those the companies that you tend to like to have? You seen them have good returns and all those things, or is it just kind of like it's situationally dependent?
Maybe I could start some the investor. I think all types of people can generally succeed. I think, and I've made money on first time founders, second time founders, all of the above, extremely seasoned executives. I think something you can't compromise on is motivation. I think that's actually like the longer I've done the job, the more I've learned that. One of my more storied companies, we don't have to get into it now, which took a while to get working.
Let's go deep. Give us the
company
detail.
Called Hive AI. It started as a random chat app, an Ask FM clone, Scale AI competitor, and now it does content moderation APIs, and it's quite successful.
Yeah.
And the founder there asked him, okay, like what stayed alive for 10 years, now it's profitable, growing really fast. They really made it work. I asked him like, well, what's the secret? He's obviously very talented. And he said 90% of startups is not giving up. And I think that's true. I think if you are motivated, you keep trying and you're like humble enough to at least pivot semi-regularly, you'll make it work eventually. But a lot of people don't, I think, have, not a lot, but some people don't have that internal motivation. They will give up. They'll be like, okay, I can't do it. Yeah. And maybe you'll find the right, direction or product for your company right away. That's really rare. Almost every successful company I've had has had to pivot in some way. So if you don't have that motivation, you're unlikely to succeed. And then the only thing I'll say between like seasoned versus new founders, I think both can do really well. The only downside I find usually from like the right at a school founder is they're more likely to sell early. They haven't made money before. And so, hey, do you want $50 million to not have to work as hard and have a great life and not live in like a studio apartment in San Francisco? Most people will say yes to that. And so it's the second time founders usually who have made some money. It doesn't even have to be a lot, who are more comfortable, who will go for that now, okay, multi-billion-dollar outcome, which at every step of the way looks irrational and only looks rational when you're like Facebook and $1 trillion company.
Alex, we were talking ahead of your arrival about chips on your shoulder. Okay. Like for reasons you understand, we don't have to get into, I have a chip on my shoulder. Kevin has a chip on his shoulder. Ahmad too. I know he grinded for a really long time. And so is that part of motivation or is that something else you want to talk about?
I think it's definitely part of motivation. It's like whatever you have to tell yourself to just push forward. I don't have to tell you guys, a startup is not like necessarily a pleasant thing to do. You're not sitting at home alone, everything's failing, all your employees want feedback and people are quitting and customers are unhappy early on and it's not quite working, you're running out of money. These are not pleasant things. So it's kind of like an irrational thing to do. And so what mode do you have to get yourself into to push through that irrational moment? I mean, eventually things work, you hire executives, it gets easier actually. But those early days, you need people, I think, who, I say they're a little crazy. Maybe you would say they're a little eccentric or independently motivated, but you need someone who's a different breed, I'd say. For most normal people, like that's not a pleasant experience to go through.
Alex, how do you spot like this kind of grit in these early founders? I would actually say my biggest investing misses is these people that are like right out of college, and I'm like, these dudes don't know anything. Like, what? And they're like, now they're like, actually the two that I'm thinking of are both $10 billion companies. But I find it really hard. Like they just don't have like these, you go to a second time entrepreneur, you're like, okay, wow, they're at it again. They grinded last time for 5 years. Like they'll probably figure it out this time. Whereas like this person straight out of college, like how do you tell they've got that like grind in them?
I don't think every great founder is a little strange. So Ahmad, I don't know you, I'm sure you're a little strange. I know these two other guys, they're a little strange. So that's generally good. If you're not a little strange
definitely.
In some way, and if no one's told you that, then maybe it's not for you. And then it's really hard because as life circumstances change, people's motivations change, and it's very hard to predict that. Some people, when they have families, for example, their motivations change and they don't want to work as hard anymore, like reasonably. Some people it doesn't. Some people get more motivated. I found COVID actually changed a lot of people's motivations. Like before COVID, entrepreneurs didn't take much vacation. I'm not saying you shouldn't take vacation. I'm just saying people didn't take much vacation or time off. During COVID, people went across the world. They found, hey, I really like this. It's a lot more fun than grinding in an office in the financial district. And I want to do more of this. And their motivations changed. So it's very hard to predict that. I don't think there's a, recipe other than you kind of get the feel a little bit. They do seem like a little irrationally motivated. They have that chip on their shoulder. But there's no formula for it.
Hey
Wait.
Kevin, when your
Yeah.
company failed, why didn't
Which
you
one?
go? I don't know. This is the most recent one. I was impressed that you went like straight back at it. Like you didn't even take a pause. Like you
He's
weren't
broken.
tempted to go
I have a
be an
problem.
investor or like do something. You have a problem?
Yeah, sorry. What was the question on that? What keeps me motivated?
I mean, why weren't you tempted to do something else? Like, why go back at it? What was your thinking?
Because I think that, so for one, I don't think that being a founder is a straight line. So I think that there's a lot of stories out there that are just like, hey, somebody started this, and like maybe they've missed a lot of the backstory. And I think that for me, it's going to be now over a course of, hopefully this will be the big one, but like over 3 companies. And I think that I continue to compound my knowledge. And I think that the previous 2 have given me just this like push to like need to be successful. Like I really truly believe that the whatever the quote is, the chips on shoulders puts chips in pockets. I truly do, because there's just a type of person that just doesn't want to fucking lose. Like I don't want to lose, and I know that I'm now better prepared to know the ups and downs. I have a really great network. I know, and I also want to continue going down in that space. So you could apply things like AI or robotics or something to a space you know really well, but you're still like you haven't worked in it for 30 years or something like that. So that's what really keeps me going. And I think the chances are, it's just like if you just keep on going at it, like your chances just are going to increase. As long as you do learn from the mistakes that you did make. But also, I think that there's another thing that we're not even talking about here, is that there's just an element of luck. Like I think that like either my past 2 venture-backed companies, if I had a little luck, and maybe that was market timing, maybe that was an acquisition, maybe it could have been anything. I had many points that it could have been a massive home run for either company. I think that kind of plays in there. So like you kind of just need to be on like on the field for as long as you possibly can to get that element of luck in there.
Alex, I want to ask you about the super weirdos that typically in your area. I went to one of Peter's parties at like a house one time, and it was like just literally people building cities on the ocean or whatever. It was like Teal Fellowship people, and I remember being like impressed, but at the same time being like, these people are wackos, like super wackos. And I will say, like, you're highly socialized. Are you one of them? I'm not sure, but you're highly socialized, and maybe you hide it well, right? And so like,
yeah,
how do you being kind of on the spectrum and high IQ and willing to consider absurd ideas? Like, how much does that play into the work that you do? You're not doing SaaS.
Yeah,
you're dealing with. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not like super. I'm not the most normal guy. I wasn't the most popular guy in high school or anything, but I wasn't unpopular. I'd say I have like high intelligence and decent EQ that I can make connections with people. And I'm also not an operator. Like I did do engineering. I did operate a little bit, but I would probably not be, anywhere near as good as you guys at starting a company. And that's okay, right? I have different, very specific skills. I can learn things really quickly. I can identify trends really quickly. I'm very good at making convincing people who are smarter than me to take my money to work with me, but those are not skills necessarily that lend themselves to operating. And I generally think there's this thing, like a lot of times you guys will see this at companies. You'll hire somebody from a big company into your business, and they just like won't work. Like you get no output out of them. I think the further away you are from having done real work, your mind just truly atrophies and you can't get anything done. And so I think like actually investing too long does that to you, where you're like, you develop a very certain set of skills, but my ability to go deep and do like deep work for a very long period of time has certainly atrophied. And I think that's okay. But it would make it hard for me to go back to founding a company, for example.
What do you, as I mentioned at the start of this, the commonality we have is that between me, Julian, and Alex, we're all Canadian. I guess, Julian, you still live in Canada, but essentially, like, you're building a U.S. company, kind of, right? Is that one of the signs that you could just, like, kind of see the people that are willing to kind of just do whatever you can? Like, I think I'm actually one of my investors will only invest in immigrants. I think that's kind of a cool, like, just that as a standout alone thing. Is that like an interesting thing, or also even just Alex, like, why did you move away from Canada?
I think being Canadian is actually good because it teaches you to be like somewhat agreeable, which if you can harness that in a good way, people will like you. So I think it's good. I think Canadians are actually pretty funny. There's a lot of great Canadian comedians. People like funny as well. And the education system is great. University of Waterloo is really good. So I think there's a lot of advantages.
Oh, you went to Waterloo, did you?
Not everybody
wow.
can get in, but when they do.
Yeah, I've heard it's
I heard
really hard
that.
to get in.
Yeah.
What was the second part of the question? I forgot it.
It was just is that like just like a tell to see
Yeah.
for
being
investing?
an immigrant is what, like, why did I come? I think there's some advantage to being an immigrant. I mean, actually, one of my very good professors, Larry Smith, would teach an Econ 101 course at Waterloo. He's really famous. And one of the big things he would talk about is immigrants self-select for people who are ambitious, right? Like, who's going to get up, leave all their family behind, come to a new place, have no social network, social structure at all. It's people who are like on the margin ambitious. And then why did I move here? I mean, there's all these like great stories people say of like, I thought about it and this was where I wanted to be. And it was strategic. Like, it really wasn't strategic at all, to be honest with you. At every point in my career, just optimized for working with the best people that I had available to work with. And so I never took the job that actually paid me the most. Like Clarium, working with Peter, didn't pay more than in Google, for example, at the time. But I thought, if I just optimize for being around the smartest people I know who are most ambitious, then great things will happen. And kind of got, life happened, worked at one great place. We started another great thing. All of it was in the Bay. I'm sure you can actually do that. There'll be a Shopify Mafia in Toronto. And if you, focus on working with Toby and Farhan and those guys, you can do great things too. It can happen anywhere. It's just more people here doing ambitious stuff than back home.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Well, we have 10 more minutes here. I know we're all super nerdy. Do we want to go like nerd out on like a topic du jour? Maybe AI or like what's not going to work.
I had a question for Alex about
please.
defense tech.
So great.
I think Alex, you were on a podcast that said this, that you feel like, hey, actually, the moment to invest in defense tech is already over, and there'll be only like 2 new defense primes, and like Anduril and someone else will do it, and it's very capital intensive. Is that, am I putting words in your mouth, or do you like mostly agree with that?
In that, people are building funds around this stuff, and we just tend to think, defense is, I think it's like 5% of GDP, maybe it's a little bit less. The available TAM there is pretty low. And so you're not going to have software style companies, or the depth of you have software companies starting in defense. I think you have 1 or 2 new primes a year for the next maybe 5 to 10 years. But it's not going to be like this huge asset class that you're going to build funds around or anything like that, in my opinion. It's part of our strategy. It's like a core part of our strategy. Even we say it'll be 10 to 20% of our funds because, you're not going to have 50 companies a year or 30 companies a year that are successful in defense.
So your overall idea is like, hey, it's not software SaaS where there'll be like,
it's not
50
biotech,
companies.
right? Like healthcare is 20% of GDP that are huge slugs of.
Do you think the US can, it feels like it would be healthier for the US if there was like 20 or maybe 50 defense companies that were all worth like 10 billion rather than like a couple of defense companies are worth 100 billion each? Like, it's just like not being a competitive market. Is there a way the US can get to like a more, I guess, fragmented, but I mean, there'll still be big companies, but fragmented, or it's just going to be consolidated?
Yeah, I wrote a piece on this I think it was last quarter, that sort of detailed it. They're trying very hard to change the way procurement works such that it could be more accessible to many companies. I don't think smaller companies necessarily are better because they're, if you move away from cost plus contracting, where the government basically pays you to do research and then you sell for what your cost is plus a margin, the company itself has to take some risk to make the product if you're not doing that anymore. And so you need to have some scale to be able to make like a jet aircraft or something like that. And so there are advantages to being $50, $100 billion company having that balance sheet. There are some minimum economies of scale in most of these areas.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's bad to have large companies. You see Google is also making a quantum computer just randomly, like nobody even knew. They just had this random team in Santa Barbara also making quantum computers. You can do that. So there are ways in which like monopolies can be good because they do have the profit to invest in R&D that's like very far, that's very capital intensive.
I think so. I really hope that it changes. So my actual first job out of college was working at Raytheon. So like I was working on a big project for NATO, and I think there was like 1,000 developers on it, and it was literally the slowest I've ever worked in my career. It was a cost plus model, and it was like the most basic shit, and like everybody just clocked their time in. Nobody gave a shit about the work at all. It was the absolute worst. So while Alex, I understand like from like an investing standpoint, like it makes some sense to have economies of scale because you just have a lot of like government bureaucracy you have to just like bake into the company. But like that is the reason that we don't have a lot of like really innovative like companies in these spaces, is because it is so hard.
I think we want to change the incentives, right? So that there's room for competition, new entrants. Like, are we mad that SpaceX is a $300 billion company? No, it's actually probably better for the country that it's bigger, right?
Yeah.
It can invest more. It is a good company. United Launch Alliance, which has not been able to compete with them as well, is the incumbents. And why did that split happen? Because we allowed competition. And so I think you can have benefits of having these big companies and that look almost like monopolies, assuming there is competition. You want the monopoly, in my opinion, to be on their like operational excellence and scale and pace of innovation, not on regulatory capture. So I think the government's actually doing a decent job of changing procurement rules to make it more competitive, to fund startups, to do contracts, small contracts from startups, things like that. They're actually
Alex, if you were talking to a founder who doesn't know anything about defense but is interested in getting in there, maybe they're like previously a software founder, like what would you advise them? How would they like start a company in this space?
I'm going to give the most self-serving answer ever, but I think this is a space where you need to work with people who have done it before.
I agree.
Like the story of Palantir was, we tried to do it like a new way for a long time, 10 years maybe. And it was only once we started doing more, traditional lobbying and things like that and understanding how the government works that you got traction. And so I think government is just unique enough and complex enough that you want people who have done it before, who understand when you hire lobbyists, what the budget line items you're going after are, who you should be talking to, things like that. So I think it's important in this space to either hire somebody who has that expertise and that knowledge as like a founder of your business, or to partner with a fund that has like a deep background in that. Like we have teams that all they do is interface with DC and talk to, DIU and like the more innovative branches of government to understand, hey, like what do you guys need so we can start building that right for the country.
Right. That's great. Why don't we kind of end it on the last few minutes on like how do people that are thinking about building a company or they want to raise money, like it seems like now, like I think I don't know, Ahmad, you know this better than me, like YC is doing like 4 batches a year and like how many companies? It seems like there's more startups than ever, which means that there's probably a lot of companies that want to get funded. Like how do you reach the Ahmads, the Alexes? I know Julian is an angel investor too. Like what can people do to get on your radar?
I'll like actually push back on one thing you said. I don't think there's more startups than ever. I think there's much fewer than in 2021.
Sure.
That's why you're
fine.
and you haven't and you haven't touched upon what I thought you definitely would, of like, because you're second-up founders, I'm sure you all dislike at least some VC out there. The like bloodbath and carnage that's been on the VC markup. Like Index fired 5 out of 8 of their partners in the SF office. Yeah. Bilal, the best guy at Lux, left. Yeah, they did. Bilal just left Lux. You know, you're seeing people retire. There's been a big bloodbath at these firms of like prominent people leaving and getting pushed out. I think a lot of that is part of that's news cycle dynamics, but part of that I think is actually like the pace of startup creation of like viable companies has gone down. You had a whole bunch of companies created during the SaaS wave, but the economy is fixed. Eventually you run out of SaaS companies to start. And so that creation event has stopped. We have AI starting now, but all you have to do is look at AI valuations to know that the supply of capital is like way higher than the demand for capital in that space, even given how much they're raising. And so I think that's like pretty interesting trend that's going on. I think the venture market still has to shrink more. Has kind of been my perspective.
Okay.
To answer your question, Kevin, although Alex's point was great, actually. I think the thing to understand as a founder is like as an investor, there is so much noise, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like continuous pitches. So you really have to just stand above the noise, right? Like, and YC is one way. Like if you get into YC or some other accelerator, that's one way to stand above the noise.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think it's a little lazy sometimes where founders are like, oh, you know, I need to get in touch with you, but I have no way to stand above the noise. Like, you know, you got to put in the effort. Like
there always is,
go to all these events and network, or, you know, like try harder, have a better pitch, have more traction, right? There's ways to, like, we're all looking for new companies to invest in as well. So there's like this kind of weird contradiction where like we're all looking for that diamond, but we're also like inundated by whatever's the opposite of diamonds, coals or something. So it is hard as an investor to get that kind of signal from the noise. And I think it's like a founder's responsibility to like create that signal.
Yeah, I'll add on this. I think that it definitely changes over your career too. So like some of the people early on that you were really close to that maybe were really great at like making the intros to folks like you guys, they just aren't doing that anymore. They're off doing their own thing. So it's like you as a founder have to continuously be reaching out, making new connections, making new ways to really stand out. That could be Twitter, it could be LinkedIn, it could be YouTube, it could be trying to get on the show. I don't know what it is. It could be anything, but you have to do everything you possibly can to stand out. Because Alex, I totally agree with your point that the number of quality companies is definitely decreased. But my point was the number of actual companies has increased. So I don't know if we want to leave it on that. Anybody has any final closing comments on this?
Show Alex at 8VC.com. Not sure if that's right. It might be.
Thank you for that. Although it's not a hard one to guess. Yeah, I mean, I would just leave it on saying, in spite of maybe the negatives and that the timing is maybe not quite right for AI, I do think it's going to be one of the best times ever to start a company over the next 10 years. If you just keep close to the capabilities and try and deploy them in industry, this can be wealth created in the economy that's probably unlike anything from the Industrial Revolution. So
I completely agree.
I do believe that.
Both of them. Agreed. All right, let's end it on that. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for joining Ahmad and Alex, and of course Julian. And see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks for having me.